Mohammed Adow is the Member of Parliament for Wajir South Constituency, and he is here. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm great.
Mm.
Thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. We waited for you, and then now you're here. Are you all right this Monday morning? Are you sure?
Yes, I am very much all right. Thank you. It's just the Nairobi troubles and traffic and all that stuff.
Yeah. Nairobi traffic can do a thing on you, can't it? All right, we're glad that you're here, and we've been talking about crises that are boiling in different places, and we're talking about a teacher crisis in northeastern Kenya. And even as you do, look, we're going to welcome you, first of all, to Kenya's biggest conversation. You're in the hot seat this morning, and even as you do, CT is going to welcome you with today's proverb.
Our proverbs for the whole of this week come from the country of Uganda. People who live together cannot fail to have quarrels.
People who live together cannot fail to have quarrels.
It's a good one.
It is.
It is.
What does it mean to you, Mweshima?
It means that conflict is part of nature, and that there will be issues and quarreling among people who live together. But it's the way they handle those quarrels that matters. And to stay a family, to stay a group, to stay a unit, to stay a community, you need to make those quarrels go away by finding the best way to resolve them. Because you still have to live together anyway.
Indeed. That's true. We're looking at crises, like I said. We know you from a former life whereby you would report on these crises or crises like these, where you would be on the other side telling the story of them. And so maybe that's not too different from what we're going to be talking about today, isn't it? From your days as a reporting journalist and to now as a member of parliament, and then trying to go towards legislature and policy making and things like that. So in northeastern Kenya, we've been told many things about teachers and what they face, and we're staring down the whole of an education crisis, in my opinion, in this country. And teachers are not left out of it. Give us an overview of what's happening from what you've seen, what you've understood to be the issues when it comes to teachers and their wherewithal, their well-being, and their career path from this part of the country.
Well, it's a big problem. The teachers' crisis in northeastern Kenya is a big problem. So much so that we are raising a generation, which I call the lost generation, who go to school every day, go through the steps of schooling, arrive in the morning, but do not much in school because of lack of teachers or the absence of teachers in their schools. About a couple of years, 2.5 years to 3 years ago, the Teacher Service Commission brought back about 5,000 teachers from the region. This was following the attacks, the unfortunate attacks that we've seen. They said they were doing that for their own security, but that left the schools exposed with very little teachers, minimal teachers. In some of the schools in my constituency, you'll find 1 or 2 teachers manning a school that has got 8 up to grade 8, some of them with 2 or 3 streams. And you can imagine they would not be even able to keep the discipline. To urge the children to keep discipline, let alone give them lessons. So it is a crisis, and we're not blaming anyone because insecurity is insecurity. But again, when you look at how the teachers have been acting, I find it a bit irresponsible, to say the least, because first of all, you go and seek a job as a teacher in northeastern Kenya. 6 months to a year later, you want to get out of the place. I know life is hard in that region. I know it's not the stuff they're used to. Life is not the same way it is back in their home counties. But again, it is also part of the country. And as Kenyans, when you sign up to a job anywhere in the country, you're supposed to go and do that job. So I find a bit unnerving and a bit I don't know how to call it, is the teachers seeking the jobs and then wanting to come back and going to any lengths to try and come back and get out of those jobs. The other day I was at TSC headquarters. I saw so many of the teachers from Mandera with vuvuzelas asking for their mass transfer out of the region. And that has left the Kenyan children in that part of the country exposed. We are raising a lost generation in that part of the country.
Moshime, what are the reasons why teachers who then have taken up a call of duty in a particular area, it doesn't matter where, actually it does matter in this case, that they've taken up the call to teach in these areas, what are the reasons that they're giving as to why they're asking for transfers?
Because they want to come back to their home counties. Because there are no job openings for teachers in their home counties, and there are job openings in Northeastern. Majority of them, I would say, want to take up jobs there so that they get into the system, and upon getting into the system, they come back. I'm not belittling the issue of insecurity. It is there. In some parts of the region, yes, it is there. But again, in those same areas of Northeastern where there is insecurity, you'll find the stonemasons, the quarry workers, the business people, the hawkers, all coming from other counties in Kenya. What is this insecurity that only teachers are facing?
You know, there's a phrase that is often used about chickens coming home to roost. One of the economists argue that infrastructure is the cornerstone that incentivizes development. Now, if you have an entire region that was deliberately neglected for decades, literally, roads that everybody took for granted exist, electricity that everybody took for granted in other parts of the country, water, just normal services. And then you get into a decade where there's an attempt to try and make up for lost time. And within that time, the neglect has spurned on other social matters that you probably hadn't foreseen, but it left the people in those areas vulnerable to very many things.
Absolutely, you're right.
You see, so now, anyone who's traveled up those roads going to Wajir or whether going to Mandera, you will find that because of the tarmac, wherever it is that it has reached as we currently speak, or areas that there was no tarmac roads, one thing that was heightened was security and safety. Just the building of a road. At the moment that road wasn't there and you have to travel slowly, you are a prime target for attack. Long before Al-Shabaab were even known. Now, these are cases that one heard in Tana River, as you're going towards Lamu. Al-Shabaab hadn't even been heard of. They were just regular homegrown bandits who understood that this was a way of life. Now, Al-Shabaab and their ilk simply highlighted the situation. Now, that having been said, the question that keeps ringing in my mind every time I read this, and I hear of it, and I'm told about this, and I discuss it, is what exactly has the government done? Because this is a national government problem. It's not a county government issue. What exactly has the national government done to ensure that they don't only just talk about about security, but they ensure that there is security? What has the government done?
Well, the government says it's doing much, but nothing much visible on the ground when it comes to issues of infrastructure.
But if nothing is, if not much has been seen, then it means precisely that nothing has been done. Because the only way you determine something has been done is if you see it, isn't it? This isn't an existential thing where we can feel and sense. We're developing something you have to see. You can't smell it, you can't taste it. You have to see it first.
The issue of infrastructure is a big issue and a huge one for the people of not just Northeastern, but the whole of Northern Kenya. There's been very little investment, as you said, aptly, in that part of the country for most of the past 5 or 6 decades. And that, as you said, is having a toll on the people, is having a big impact on security or the lack of it. And I always say there are two Kenyas. That Kenya, which is not aware of the other part of Kenya, which has most of the stuff that people need, infrastructure, schools, your teachers, mention everything. And that part of the country where there's a lack of almost everything. Now, since devolution began, there's a lot of chest thumping among government operatives that, hey, we've given you your fair share of the national cake. But is that enough? No, it's not. What the region needs is a huge investment in infrastructure, a huge investment in education, because it's only education that can, in the long run, push back against these extremists and people who want to cause harm in our country.
Can there be accountability for the money that has been sent? Because the cry has been, Mheshimiwa, that, there's no development. There's been chest thumping by government, as you've said, of the things that they're doing, but you can't see anything on the ground. So hadn't the question rather go towards those who've been responsible for development? What have you actually done? In the shillings that you have received, what have you done to ensure that we don't have these things that we're talking about, whereby teachers come, they take up a job, and then they go away? Because the security mechanisms have not been implemented by the money that has been given. So before we get to can more money come, how about you tell us what has been done with what has been given you at that point?
I'll be very frank with you. And honestly, I cannot defend the indefensible. That money has been lost, and in corruption is a reality no one can deny. The winner takes it all attitude of some of the governors in northeastern Kenya, where they use the county funds as a slush fund, is practically there for everyone to see. I'm not going to defend that. I'm not also going to say that nothing has been done, because a lot has been done by the county governments. But I don't know where the disconnect is. Maybe it is lack of a vision, or the feeling that somebody has to develop those parts where his family or his clan comes from. The region still has a long way to go, despite billions of shillings being poured into it through the devolution funds.
Think for a second, Mheshimiwa. People who study anthropology, sociology, these social sciences or behavioral sciences will tell you that there are direct correlations between certain things. One, if you look at poverty cycles, whether it is brought about by drought, whether it's brought about by simple direct government policy neglect, whether it is brought about by whatever circumstances you may think of, one of the things that it entrenches in people is what they have grown up to understand as the traditional ways of life. So, if resource or the absence of resource was an avenue for conflict, it doesn't go away.
So true. You have a point there.
When you have money coming in, that same way of looking at things will now be at that level of the county.
It takes the same avenues.
It does. So depending on who is governor and where he comes from, the same traditional mindset. It takes a very long time. It takes a visionary leader to actually sow the seeds of uniformity where people can declare and say, this person treats everybody fairly.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. But also there's this little matter of taking into account and understanding the norms by which people understand development. I remember having a conversation once with some commission of revenue allocation.
Yes.
It was a very insightful conversation. I'm not going to mention the county, but it's northeastern. And they said when they went there, the thing they found surprising was their understanding of devolution, if you look at it purely from an academic perspective, was very good.
Yes.
Because money came, clans were called on the leaders, and we were told, okay, everybody gets their share. So thereafter, you decide what you're going to do with your money. Okay? Now, whether this story was true or not, or whether they're giving me some grand drama, I thought to myself, it makes sense. But I asked, did they have a development plan as to what it is they considered their priorities and how they're going to use the money? He said they did. I said, okay, now, was anything left in the kitty? Because the central government of a county has to be responsible for certain things. Exactly. You can't leave it to everybody. Now, it became fuzzy at that particular point. What am I saying? If you look around the country and you look at the way county governments around the country have handled the monies given to them, Northeastern is not an exception.
Yeah, but they don't live in an island. They're still part of
Not
Kenya.
in isolation.
Yes, not in isolation.
Precisely. You would assume that if you come from a county that had been marginalized, there'd be a great need for you to uplift your
Exactly.
people. But then, yes, go ahead, please.
I mean, and that is the crux of the matter, because when you are given the responsibility to lead a community that has been marginalized, that has had no investment from the center for so long, I think an extra layer of responsibility falls on your shoulder.
It does, actually.
To ensure that the people get most of what you're given.
Yes.
To do things for them.
Yes.
I mean,
and so it's not enough to say that for teachers, for example, who are in Wajir, to get an extra hardship allowance, it doesn't suffice. What we're essentially saying is, fix or establish the roads. Let's make sure that if you have a school in central, western, eastern Kenya, you have one in northern Kenya.
Yes. That
you have roads that are pliable in northern Kenya, that you have security apparatus set up in northern Kenya. So we're saying that, okay, we're saying that an additional allowance is not enough, but that the infrastructure that is around the country is what is required in this part of the country as well.
I mean,
it's very simply so. Is that not what we're saying?
An extra allowance for the teachers,
doesn't cut it.
It's just band-aid. It's not going to cut it. What we need is the recruitment, the training and recruitment of more local teachers who understand the terrain, who can live within that society, who identify with them, and who would stay there for as long as it takes.
Are there enough people who are interested in teaching?
Yes. I mean, before there was this myth that Somalis in Northeastern are not interested in taking up the teaching profession. When I came to office, I announced a scholarship for teachers, teacher trainees. I announced a scholarship, full scholarship for anyone who wants to pursue teaching. And we were actually overwhelmed by the response. At the moment, we have more than 280 trainees from Wajir South in colleges and universities across the country, getting diplomas and degrees in education. It is possible in every nook and cranny of the region.
Let's assume.
And it's not that the students are not interested in pursuing teaching.
Okay.
They are.
Let's live in Wonderland for a moment and say that those who are responsible for releasing the strings of the purse then are not aware to the extent that this, situation has gotten. Okay? Members of Parliament then, at that level, do we see that there is continuous and robust agitation for the attention that is needed in this area to be brought to the fore? And I'm not talking about before the plenary one day and then it doesn't happen again until after Parliament resumes. I'm talking about a serious, repetitive, unwavering, not getting tired, deliberate and sustained agitation of these issues on the floor of the House until two things happen. Somebody takes notice, and number two, something is done. Do we see that? Is it happening?
It is happening, with almost every member of Parliament from the region speaking loudly and as loudly as possible about the problem with teachers and the education crisis in Northeastern. We do, but it's almost always falling on deaf ears until we've had to take matters into our own hands and start using, and it's rightly the only way of doing it, because we've not been getting as much support as possible from the quarters who were supposed to act on this. We're now forced to use the Constituency Development Fund to train teachers. And I think it's the best way to do, given the circumstances and how, obstinate the authorities have been.
You don't need to apologize.
I'm not apologizing.
No, don't.
Yes.
Don't even skirt on the periphery of apology when it comes to such a matter. Because if you look at the development of education, and especially education institutions in this country, where communities have made progress, it wasn't a government effort.
Yes,
it was individuals deciding they're going to build Harambee schools.
Exactly. And that's I studied through a Harambee school. The first 3 years of schooling I studied under a tree until our parents had to come and do Harambee to build us our first classes at grade 3.
The big difference, though, is that with successive governments, depending on who was in power, some regions benefited better than others because the Harambee schools became government schools.
Exactly.
And there were many.
Sure. But I must ask you, what's the difference then with teachers? Because you said something very important. Traders, businessmen from different parts of the country are still able to come and thrive in these areas.
And are not running away.
Isn't it? And are not running away.
No.
They come, they do their business. They live in Wajir. They live in Mandera. They live in Turkana. They live in these areas.
They do.
They do.
Yes.
They raise families.
Yes.
Isn't it?
Yes. And
they
their
go
kids
home,
go through the same schools.
Their kids go to those schools.
Yes.
So why is it that business people who work will stay, but that teachers ask to leave? What's happening here? Why is teachers specifically? And perhaps if we look at that, then we can see where a solution might come. Because what is the special thing with teachers?
There's so many conspiracy theories, and I'm not going to delve into them. All I'm saying is that there is a need to look into that issue wholesomely, and there is more to it than meets the eye. Because why are teachers the only ones feeling the hit when it comes to insecurity? Where are they? The other day, a letter was written by a government official talking about my constituency, which is one of the safest in Northeastern. I share one of the longest borders any constituency in Kenya has with Somalia. Probably the longest is the one my constituency has with Somalia.
Okay.
But because of cross-border collaboration between the two communities living on either side of the border, we have managed to have collaboration between our people, the Kenyan people on this side, and the ones on the other side, and we have had successes in terms of ensuring that the region, the constituency remains safe. Yet somebody in a government office chose to write a letter warning of impending attacks on schools. Impending attacks on schools, which saw many of the teachers in schools in my constituency taking the night bus out. Some of these things make you think that this could be deliberate.
And it was not true?
Absolutely untrue. False alarm. Yet it has been written. And I have the copy.
So then again, Mheshimiwa, one must ask, because look, it could be conspiratorial indeed, as you say, but I think it is important to look into the underbelly of some of these things. What reason would anyone, government official or otherwise, have in sending a letter of such great magnitude? Because you could see the immediate effect of that.
Yes.
People got on buses, disappeared.
And left, yes.
What reason would one have to
But at the
make
same
such a
time,
statement?
it's just the teachers taking the buses, not the stonemasons.
So what's going on?
I think you may not the hawkers, not the traders, not the people who are selling vegetables in the market, who are from other counties. What is it? Somebody somewhere needs to look critically at this, and the investigative agencies.
What could be the issue, Mheshimiwa? And I think we maybe need to look at that. What could be the issue? Because why? It doesn't make sense otherwise. Those who stay are human beings, just like teachers.
Exactly.
Why are they not leaving?
The why is what we need to find out.
So maybe it isn't actually then an infrastructure issue, because the people who stay there are still staying. We realize the importance of having good roads. We know that. We know the importance of having built institutions where children can learn.
I was in primary school more than 30 years ago, and my teachers were from all walks of life, all parts of Kenya. I mean, infrastructure was worse off then than it is now. It's not about infrastructure. It's not about how far-flung the place is. It's not about, the hardship, or if at all there is any hardship. If it's nothing got to do with their life there.
So what's the chatter?
I think it's political.
To what benefit, or on to what end?
We have to look at this together to find out. I will not use those things that are being said down there. I'll just.
I will venture.
I will be open-minded.
I will venture into it if you want, and I will quote. There's a Victorian novelist by the name of Anthony Trollope. I'm going to paraphrase what he said. One of the things that he mentioned, he said, human nature will not endure. Okay, somebody who in the race of life you had rendered to a certain position overtaking you, said human nature will not endure it. Now, apply this notion to just individual life on a daily basis. People have this tendency of thinking that certain communities belong to a certain position in society and shouldn't budge from it. So when they budge from it, it defies the narrative by which many of these people have identified themselves for centuries. Now that is something that human nature will not endure. Now, I have said it in the broadest of terms, and you can use it individually, even in communities. The jokes that are made, the country from which this writer came from. If you listen to the jokes that the English made about the Irish, they're derogatory, or about the Welsh,
yes.
or about the Scots.
Yes.
Same. Bring it home. How we categorize our own citizens, the people from this region, people from this. Now, so long as it remains banter, you may think it is harmless, but it isn't harmless. Because over time, it becomes the captive, and it becomes the dominant narrative by which people identify everyone who comes from that particular place. Now, unfortunately, human nature, when looked at from an individual perspective, seems academic enough, but when an entire community develops and has that attitude, then it means it's an attitude that they have against another community in its entirety, without looking specifically into what it is that community represents. Simple enough.
Mheshimiwa, the 280 teachers that are
Yes.
in training
Yes.
at the moment,
Yes.
the hope is that eventually they will come back
And fill the void.
and fill the void and start to teach.
Yeah.
Is the hope also that they too will not want to leave? And if they don't, then what would make them stay? Let's not look at the conspiracy, but let's look at the other side of it. So the assumption is that because they are indigens and they've been trained as teachers, that they will come back after their training and stay. Is that the hope?
Yes, that's the hope, and we believe that's what's going to happen, because that's where they come from. They will be teaching their brothers and sisters.
Okay.
They will be teaching their cousins. They will be teaching people who, they have a sense of belonging, and a region that they call their own. It's part of a country that is theirs. So they will, and because they've been trained with public funds, we've also bonded them, and they've given the assurance that they will go back and teach.
Do we find that there is an interest from the locals of Northeastern, the residents, the indigens, to actually contribute, whether it's on a personal business level, to contribute towards the development of these areas themselves, not come and develop other areas, but take their hard-earned resources and put them back into the area where they're from? Would this make a difference?
Yes, that is a constant thing. We keep telling our people that they should go back and invest in the region, open up schools there, build some of these buildings they're building in the capital and other places back home, invest in businesses back home. But again, this is a simple issue of microeconomics. These are people who are investing in places where they know they were going to get a return for their money. And that's what is actually driving them. It's not the fact that they abhor where they call home and their region, their home region and all that. It's all an issue of supply and demand, basic microeconomics. So, but we are urging them, and we've been urging for a long time, for locals from Northeastern to invest back home.
Because we
and
can see them investing in other parts of the country.
A great number of them are doing that. People see the bustling business community and very hardworking Somali traders in Nairobi. Developing Nairobi. But they're also developing back home. If you look at it, if you take a picture of Garissa 10 years ago and Garissa today, it's a totally different town. The same with Wajir, the same with Mandera. And the people doing it are the same people, you know, Somali business people.
You're absolutely right. You only need to go to Wilson Airport on any day and look at the number of flights that go to that region every single day. It's serious business. Let me just say this. I know we're coming to the end of this particular hour. There are things which are within the purview and the control of a community, and it is those things they must grasp. Because there's this cat you're trying to bell called the government, and unfortunately it's a strange animal. It does its own things, but it also knows how to play catch up. If you have moved to a point where they feel they can assist, it's not because they like you, it's because they can take credit for whatever else that you've done. And sometimes that's the game that must be played. The two communities that are independent were way ahead of other communities in this country were the Kikuyus and Luas. And the reason was because they had a large number of people who were educated.
Exactly.
Now, they benefited from missionaries, the airlift, you name it. The Kikuyus benefited because they built their own indigenous schools, which later the government took over. Now, all I'm saying is, at the heart of any development of any nation, and I'm talking about nation as a big conglomeration of people and a small group of people, those smaller nations, there has to be that individual effort of that group if you hope to uplift your people.
Yes.
Looking at that bigger body called the government is a tall order. But you start. Somewhere along the line, they'll realize it's in their interest to join you, and they'll join you, not the other way around.
Definitely.
Yes.
What's your hope, Mheshimiwa, in the coming years, in the coming weeks, in the coming months?
I mean, we have borne challenges bigger than the one we are facing before. We've had instances where we have had so many problems at the same time. We will weather this. I have no doubt in my mind that we will weather this. And if these efforts that have just begun, for example, the Mandera governor now delving into the issue of recruitment for teachers, some of the members of parliament doing that, very soon we will offset the balance. And that region, against all odds again, will shine through as it has done many times in the past.
Sounds good. Good words to go on. We want you to come back to open up this conversation a little bit more and to see the progress that has been made over time, keeping people accountable and making sure that folks who are in this can actually come forth through that. So, I mean, it was a short conversation. We'll be glad to have you back again. Sure. Mohammed Adow is the Member of Parliament for the Wajir South Constituency. He's been our guest this hour, and we'll do it again in the short term. Morning, folks.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.